The rain came down in sheets that Tuesday evening, turning the streets of downtown into rivers of gray water. Sarah Mitchell pulled her warm coat tighter around her shoulders as she hurried down Fifth Avenue, her sneakers splashing through puddles. She was already 20 minutes late for her shift at the Golden Fork, and her manager Patricia absolutely hated tardiness. The Golden Fork was one of those restaurants that pretended to be fancier than it actually was. White tablecloths, dim lighting, prices that made Sarah wince every time she looked at the menu. She had been waiting tables there for 3 years, ever since she dropped out of nursing school to take care of her sick mother. The tips were decent, and it helped pay the bills, even if it meant dealing with difficult customers and Patricia's constant criticism. Sarah pushed through the employee entrance and quickly changed into her uniform, a black dress with a white apron that had seen better days. She tied her dark hair back into a ponytail and checked her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Dark circles under her eyes told the story of too many double shifts and not enough sleep. When she emerged onto the restaurant floor, Patricia was waiting with her arms crossed and a scowl on her face. Patricia was a thin woman in her 50s who seemed to think running a mid-tier restaurant was equivalent to commanding an army. "You're late," Patricia said sharply. "I'm sorry, the bus was delayed because of the rain," Sarah explained, keeping her voice steady. "I don't want to hear excuses. Table 7 needs water, Table 12 wants their check, and we have a VIP in the private dining room tonight. Make sure you stay away from that section. Marcus is handling it." Sarah nodded and got to work, falling into the familiar rhythm of taking orders, delivering food, and forcing smiles even when customers were rude. The evening rush was particularly busy, and she barely had time to think as she moved from table to table. Around 8 o'clock, Sarah was refilling water glasses when she heard raised voices near the front entrance. She turned to see the host, a young man named Derek, blocking someone from entering. "Sir, I've already told you, this is a private establishment. You can't come in here," Derek was saying, his voice loud enough to draw attention from nearby tables. Sarah moved closer and saw who Derek was talking to. It was an older man, probably in his 60s, with a weathered face and clothes that were dirty and torn. His gray hair was matted, and he held a small cardboard sign that read, "Homeless veteran, anything helps, God bless." Sarah recognized him. She had seen him sitting on the corner of 5th and Main for the past few months, always polite, never aggressive. "Please," the man said quietly, his voice hoarse, "I just want to get out of the rain for a few minutes. I'm not asking for food, just a few minutes to dry off." "I don't care what you want. You need to leave now before I call the police," Derek said, his hand already reaching for his phone. Several customers had stopped eating to watch the scene unfold. Some of them were whispering to each other, their expressions ranging from uncomfortable to disgusted. Her heart sank. She knew what was about to happen. The man would be thrown out into the rain, and everyone would go back to their expensive meals without a second thought. Without really thinking about the consequences, Sarah stepped forward. "Wait," she said, her voice carrying across the entrance area. Derek turned to look at her, annoyed. "Sarah, this doesn't concern you. Get back to your tables." "Just give him a minute," Sarah said, looking at the homeless man with compassion. "He's not bothering anyone. Let him stand inside for a few minutes until the rain lets up." "Are you serious right now?" Derek asked incredulously. "Look at him. He'll drive away customers." "He's a human being," Sarah said, her voice firmer now. "And last time I checked, showing basic human decency doesn't cost anything." The homeless man looked at Sarah with surprise and gratitude in his eyes. "Miss, I don't want to cause any trouble," he said softly. "You're not causing trouble," Sarah assured him. "Come on, let's get you dried off a little." She grabbed some clean napkins from a nearby station and handed them to the man. He took them with shaking hands and began dabbing at his wet face and hair. "Sarah," Patricia's sharp voice cut through the moment like a knife. "What do you think you're doing?" Sarah turned to face her manager, who had materialized with her usual perfect timing for making situations worse. "I'm helping someone who needs help," Sarah said simply. Patricia's face flushed red. "This man is not a customer. He needs to leave immediately. This is not a homeless shelter." "It's raining," Sarah pointed out. "I'm just letting him dry off for a moment." "I don't care if it's raining fire from the sky. This establishment has standards, and we cannot have someone like this loitering in our entrance. It's bad for business." Patricia gestured at the homeless man as if he were an unwelcome piece of furniture. What Sarah didn't know was that in the private dining room Patricia had mentioned earlier, someone was watching the entire scene unfold through the glass partition. Richard Thornton, one of the wealthiest men in the country, had chosen the Golden Fork for a quiet dinner specifically because it was supposed to be unremarkable and discreet. At 68 years old, Richard had built a business empire worth billions, but lately he had been thinking more about legacy than money. Richard had been about to take a bite of his overpriced steak when the commotion at the entrance caught his attention. He watched with interest as the young waitress stood up to both the host and the manager, defending a homeless man with a conviction that seemed to come from genuine compassion rather than performative virtue. Back at the entrance, the situation was escalating. Other staff members had gathered, and some customers were complaining about the disturbance. Patricia was becoming more aggressive, and Derek looked like he wanted to physically remove the homeless man. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave one final time, or I will call the authorities," Patricia said coldly. The homeless man nodded sadly and began shuffling toward the door, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Sarah felt anger rise in her chest, hot and fierce. "You know what?" Sarah heard herself saying. "If he leaves, I leave." The words hung in the air for a moment. Patricia stared at her in disbelief. "Excuse me?" Patricia said slowly, as if she couldn't quite believe what she had heard. "You heard me," Sarah said, surprised by her own boldness. "If you're going to throw him out into the rain without even letting him dry off for 5 minutes, then I don't want to work here anymore." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "You realize you're throwing away your job over some homeless person you don't even know?" "His name is Robert," Sarah said, though she had just read it off his sign. "And yes, apparently I am." She untied her apron and handed it to Patricia. The homeless man, Robert, looked at her with shock. "Miss, please, you don't have to do this," he said urgently. "I'll go. Please don't lose your job because of me." Sarah smiled at him gently. "It's okay. I should have done this a long time ago." She walked to the back, grabbed her coat and purse from her locker, and returned to the entrance. Robert was still standing there, looking uncertain and upset. "Come on," said to him. "There's a diner 2 blocks from here. I'll buy you dinner." "Miss, I can't let you do that," Robert protested. "Too late. I'm unemployed now anyway," Sarah said with a small laugh that was only slightly bitter. "Might as well spend my last paycheck on something worthwhile." As they walked toward the exit together, Sarah glanced back one last time. She saw the other staff members staring at her like she had lost her mind. Patricia looked furious. The customers had mostly gone back to their meals, the entertainment over. What Sarah didn't see was Richard Thornton standing up from his table in the private dining room, his dinner forgotten. He had witnessed the entire exchange, and something about it had struck a chord deep within him. He pulled out his phone and made a quick call to his assistant. "James, I need you to do something for me," Richard said quietly. "There's a young woman who just left the Golden Fork restaurant on 5th Avenue. I need you to find out everything about her. Name, address, employment history, everything. And I need it by tomorrow morning." "Sir, is everything all right?" James asked, confused. "Everything's fine. Just do it," Richard said and hung up. Outside, Sarah and Robert hurried through the rain toward the diner she had mentioned. It was a small, old-fashioned place called Rosie's that stayed open late and served breakfast all day. When they walked in, the warmth hit them immediately, along with the smell of coffee and bacon. Sarah chose a booth near the back and gestured for Robert to sit down. He did so hesitantly, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. A waitress came over, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a tired smile. "What can I get you folks?"
"I'll have coffee and a grilled cheese," Sarah said, "and he'll have whatever he wants." She looked at Robert encouragingly. Robert stared at the menu like it contained the secrets of the universe. "I'll have the meatloaf dinner," he said quietly, "with mashed potatoes and coffee. Thank you." After the waitress left, an awkward silence settled between them. Sarah studied Robert more carefully now. Despite his dirty clothes and weathered appearance, there was something dignified about him. His eyes were clear and intelligent. "You didn't have to do that," Robert finally said. "Lose your job, I mean." "I know," Sarah replied, "but I did it anyway." "Why?" Robert asked.
You don't know me. Sarah thought about it for a moment. When I was 12, my dad lost his job. He was a construction foreman, but the company went bankrupt. We lost our house 6 months later. For almost a year, we lived in our car, my mom, my dad, and me. I remember what it was like when people looked at us like we were less than human, like we were dirty or dangerous just because we didn't have a home. I remember how much it hurt. Robert's eyes widened. I'm sorry you went through that. We eventually got back on our feet. My dad found work, we got an apartment. But I never forgot what it felt like to be invisible, to have people look right through you like you don't exist. So when I saw them treating you like that, like you weren't even a person, I just couldn't stand there and do nothing. The coffee arrived, and they both wrapped their hands around the warm mugs gratefully. The rain continued to pound against the windows, creating a cozy feeling inside the diner. Can I ask what happened? Sarah ventured. How did you end up on the streets? Robert took a sip of coffee before answering. I was in the army, did 2 tours in Iraq. When I came back, I couldn't adjust. PTSD, they called it. I had nightmares, anxiety attacks, started drinking to cope, lost my job, then my wife, then my house. Been on the streets for about 5 years now. Have you tried getting help? Sarah asked gently. Robert nodded. I've been to the VA a few times. They put me on a waiting list for housing assistance. That was 18 months ago. I'm still waiting. The food arrived, and Sarah watched as Robert tried to eat slowly and with dignity, even though she could tell he was starving. It broke her heart. They talked for over an hour. Sarah learned that Robert had a daughter who lived in California who didn't know he was homeless, because he was too ashamed to tell her. She learned that he had been a high school teacher before joining the military, that he loved history and could recite passages from famous speeches from memory. He wasn't just a homeless man. He was a person, with a history, with dreams that had been derailed by circumstances and bad luck. When the check came, Sarah paid it with most of the cash she had in her wallet. She didn't care. For the first time in months, she felt like she had done something that actually mattered. Outside the diner, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. Robert looked at Sarah with such profound gratitude that it made her want to cry. Thank you, he said simply. Not just for the meal, but for treating me like I matter. You have no idea what that means. You do matter, Sarah said firmly. Don't ever forget that. They said their goodbyes, and Sarah watched as Robert shuffled off down the street, back to wherever he spent his nights. She felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness as she walked toward the bus stop. The next morning, Sarah woke up to the harsh reality of unemployment. She spent the morning updating her resume and applying to other restaurants in the area. The job market wasn't great, and she knew it might take weeks to find something new. She tried not to think about how thin her savings were or how her rent was due in 2 weeks. Around noon, there was a knock on her apartment door. Sarah opened it to find a man in an expensive suit standing in the hallway. He was in his 40s, with sharp eyes and an air of professional competence. Sarah Mitchell? He asked. Yes, Sarah replied cautiously. My name is James Ryder. I'm an assistant to Richard Thornton. Mr. Thornton would like to speak with you, if you have a moment. Sarah stared at him blankly. Richard Thornton? The billionaire? Yes, ma'am. Why would Richard Thornton want to speak with me? Sarah asked, completely bewildered. I'm not at liberty to say, but I can assure you it's nothing bad. Mr. Thornton was very insistent that I find you and extend his invitation for a meeting. He's waiting in a car downstairs if you're available now. Sarah's mind raced.
This had to be some kind of mistake, or maybe a scam. But James had business cards, and when Sarah quickly Googled him on her phone, he appeared to be exactly who he said he was. "Okay," Sarah said slowly. "Let me just grab my shoes." 10 minutes later, Sarah found herself sitting in the back of a luxury car that probably cost more than she made in 5 years. Richard Thornton sat across from her, a distinguished man with silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. He was dressed casually in slacks and a sweater, but everything about him screamed wealth and power. "Miss Mitchell, thank you for agreeing to meet with me on such short notice," Richard said warmly. "I apologize for the unusual circumstances." "It's fine," Sarah said, though she felt completely out of her depth. "But I have to admit, I have no idea why I'm here." Richard smiled. "I was dining at the Golden Fork last night. I witnessed what happened at the entrance with you and the homeless veteran." Sarah's stomach dropped.
Oh, she wondered if somehow she was going to get sued or something equally ridiculous. "I wanted to tell you that what you did was remarkable," Richard continued. "In my experience, true compassion and moral courage are rare qualities. You stood up for someone who couldn't stand up for himself, and you did it at great personal cost. That impressed me deeply." Sarah didn't know what to say. "Thank you, I guess, but I didn't do anything special. I just did what anyone should have done." "But most people don't," Richard said quietly. "That's what makes it special." He leaned forward slightly. "Miss Mitchell, I've spent my entire life building businesses and making money. I've been very successful at it. But lately, I've been thinking about legacy and what really matters. I want to do something meaningful with my resources, something that actually helps people. Last night, watching you, I was reminded of why that's important." "That's admirable," Sarah said carefully, still not sure where this was going. "I'd like to offer you a job," Richard said. Sarah blinked. "A job?" "Yes. I'm starting a new foundation focused on helping homeless veterans get back on their feet. Housing, job training, mental health services, the works. I need someone to help me run it, someone who actually cares about the people we're trying to help, not just someone who sees it as a line on their resume. I think you would be perfect for the position." Sarah felt like the car was spinning. "Mr. Thornton, I appreciate the offer, but I don't have any experience running a foundation. I'm a waitress who didn't even finish nursing school." "But you have something more important than experience. You have empathy and integrity. Those can't be taught." Richard pulled out a folder and handed it to her. "Everything else can be learned. This is a job description and salary information. I'd like you to consider it." Sarah opened the folder and nearly dropped it when she saw the salary figure. It was more than triple what she made at the restaurant. It included health insurance, retirement benefits, and something called a housing stipend. "This is too much," Sarah said, shaking her head. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," Richard replied. "I had James do some research. I know you dropped out of school to care for your sick mother. I know you work double shifts to pay her medical bills. I know you volunteer at a soup kitchen on your days off. I know you're exactly the kind of person I want representing this foundation." Sarah felt tears prickling at her eyes. She didn't know what to say. "There's one condition," Richard added. "I want you to help me find Robert, the man you defended last night. He's going to be the first person we help. Full support, housing, whatever he needs. Can you do that?" "Yes," Sarah said immediately. "Yes, I can find him. He usually stays near the corner of 5th and Main." "Good," Richard said with satisfaction. "So, do you accept the position?" Sarah looked down at the folder in her hands, then back up at Richard Thornton. She thought about all the nights she had lain awake worrying about money, about her mother's medical bills, about the future. She thought about Robert and all the other people like him who just needed someone to give them a chance. She thought about how one moment of standing up for what was right had completely changed her life. "Yes," she said, her voice stronger now. "I accept." Richard smiled, and it transformed his entire face. He suddenly looked younger, more alive. "Welcome aboard, Miss Mitchell. I think we're going to do great things together." Over the next few weeks, Sarah's life transformed in ways she never could have imagined.
Richard was true to his word. She started working at the newly formed Thornton Veterans Foundation, and while the learning curve was steep, she threw herself into the work with passion. Richard had hired experienced staff to handle the administrative and legal aspects, but he made it clear that Sarah's role was to be the heart of the organization, to make sure they never lost sight of the actual human beings they were helping. The first order of business was finding Robert. Sarah went back to the corner where she usually saw him, and after 2 days of searching, she found him sitting in his usual spot with his cardboard sign. "Robert," she called out. He looked up, and his eyes widened in recognition. "Miss Sarah? What are you doing here?" "I've been looking for you," Sarah said, sitting down next to him on the sidewalk, not caring about her new work clothes. "I have something to tell you." She explained everything. The job offer from Richard Thornton, the new foundation, and the fact that Robert was going to be their first success story. Robert listened with increasing disbelief. "This is some kind of joke, right?" he asked when she finished. "No joke," Sarah assured him. "If you're willing, we have an apartment ready for you, fully furnished. We'll help you get your VA benefits sorted out, connect
You with mental health services, and when you're ready, we'll help you find work." Robert started to cry, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Why would you do this for me?" "Because everyone deserves a second chance," Sarah said softly. "Because you matter." That afternoon, Sarah drove Robert to his new apartment. It was a modest one-bedroom in a decent neighborhood, nothing fancy, but clean and safe. When Robert walked in and saw the furniture, the stocked kitchen, the bathroom with hot water, he broke down completely. Sarah held him while he cried, years of pain and shame and hopelessness pouring out of him. Over the following months, the foundation grew. They helped dozens of veterans get off the streets. Some succeeded immediately, others struggled and needed more support. Sarah learned that there were no easy answers, that every person's situation was unique and complicated. But she also learned that even small acts of kindness could ripple outward in unexpected ways. Robert thrived. With stable housing and access to mental health care, he began to heal from his trauma. He started attending AA meetings and got sober. 3 months after moving into his apartment, he started volunteering at the foundation, helping other veterans navigate the system. His kindness and understanding made him perfect for the role. 6 months later, Sarah hired him as a full-time peer counselor. One evening, Sarah was working late at the foundation office when Richard stopped by. He often did that, dropping in to see how things were going. They had developed an easy working relationship built on mutual respect. "You should go home," Richard said, noticing the time. "It's almost 9. "Just finishing up some paperwork," Sarah replied. "We have 3 new intakes tomorrow, and I want to make sure everything is ready." Richard sat down across from her desk. "You know, when I started this foundation, I thought I was doing it to help people like Robert, and we are. But I've come to realize that it's helped me just as much. You've reminded me what really matters in life." Sarah smiled. "I should be thanking you. You gave me an opportunity I never would have had otherwise." "No," Richard said firmly. "You earned this opportunity the moment you stood up for Robert in that restaurant. You showed me what real courage looks like. All I did was recognize it." There was a comfortable silence for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah ventured. "Why were you at the Golden Fork that night? I mean, no offense, but it's not exactly the kind of place where billionaires usually eat." Richard laughed. "You're right about that. The truth is, I was supposed to meet someone for a business dinner, but they canceled at the last minute. I was already in the area and didn't feel like going somewhere fancy by myself, so I just picked the first place I saw. Pure luck, or maybe fate." "I don't believe in fate," Sarah said. "Neither did I," Richard replied. "But after that night, I'm not so sure anymore." A year after that rainy night at the Golden Fork, the Thornton Veterans Foundation held its first annual gala to raise awareness and funds. Sarah stood on the stage in a dress she never would have been able to afford a year ago, looking out at a room full of wealthy donors and community leaders. Richard had insisted she give the keynote speech,
even though public speaking terrified her. She took a deep breath and began. "A year ago, I was a waitress at a restaurant downtown. I was barely making ends meet, worried about bills, exhausted from double shifts. I thought I knew what my life was going to be. And then, one rainy night, a homeless veteran walked into the restaurant, looking for shelter from the storm. What happened next changed my life in ways I never could have imagined." She told the story of that night, of standing up for Robert, of losing her job and gaining so much more. She talked about the foundation and the lives they had helped rebuild. And then she invited Robert to join her on stage. Robert walked up confidently, looking healthy and strong in a suit that Sarah had helped him pick out. The change in him was remarkable. He spoke about his journey, about hitting rock bottom and finding his way back with the foundation's help. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. After the speeches, during the reception, Sarah found herself talking to a reporter from a local newspaper. The story of the foundation and Sarah's role in it had attracted some media attention, though Sarah tried to keep a low profile. "So, what's next for you and the foundation?" the reporter asked. "We want to expand," Sarah said. "We're opening a second location next month, and we're working on partnerships with other organizations to reach more veterans. But we also want to broaden our scope to help other homeless populations, single mothers, young people aging out of foster care, anyone who needs a hand up." "That's ambitious." "It is," Sarah agreed. "But a year ago, I never would have
thought any of this was possible. I've learned not to underestimate what can happen when people actually care and take action." The reporter scribbled notes. "One more question. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't defended Robert that night? If you had just kept your head down and stayed out of it?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "All the time. And I'm so grateful I didn't. Because I would have kept that job, sure, but I would have lost something more important. I would have lost my sense of who I am and what I stand for. Sometimes the right choice isn't the easy choice, but it's still the right choice." After the gala ended and the guests had left, Sarah stood outside the venue looking up at the night sky. It was a clear night, stars visible despite the city lights. She thought about how different her life was now, how much had changed in just 1 year. Deep in thought, a voice asked. She turned to see Richard approaching. "Just reflecting," Sarah said. "It's been quite a year." "It has indeed," Richard agreed. He stood next to her, also looking up at the sky. "You know, Sarah, I've been thinking about succession planning for the foundation. I'm not getting any younger, and I want to make sure it continues long after I'm gone." "Richard, you're not that old," Sarah protested. "I'm 69, and I've had 2 heart attacks. I'm not being morbid, just realistic." Richard turned to face her. "I want you to know that I'm putting provisions in my will to ensure the foundation is fully funded in perpetuity, and I want you to take over as executive director when I step down, which I plan to do in about 5 years." Sarah was stunned. "Richard, I don't know if I'm qualified for that." "You're more than qualified. You've proven that over and over this past year. You have the passion, the integrity, and the leadership skills. Everything else can be learned." Richard smiled. "Besides, this was always meant to be your foundation. I just provided the startup capital." They stood in comfortable silence for a few moments. "Can I tell you something?" Sarah said quietly. "Sometimes I have nightmares that I wake up and this was all a dream. That I'm back in my tiny apartment, worried about rent, working double shifts at the restaurant. It doesn't seem real that my life changed so completely because I did one decent thing." "It wasn't just one decent thing," Richard corrected gently. "It was a reflection of who you are as a person. You didn't defend Robert because you thought something good would come of it. You did it because it was right. That's the difference between genuine character and performance. And that's why all of this is real and why you deserve it." 2 years later, the foundation had helped over 500 veterans and expanded to include programs for other vulnerable populations. Sarah had become a respected voice in the nonprofit sector, speaking at conferences and advising other organizations.
Robert had become a full-time employee and had even reconnected with his daughter in California, who flew out to visit him regularly. Patricia, the manager who had fired Sarah that night, had actually reached out a few months ago to apologize. She had lost her job at the Golden Fork when the restaurant closed due to health code violations and was struggling to find work. Sarah, remembering her own difficult times, had helped Patricia find a position at a different restaurant and had done so without holding a grudge. It was a small gesture, but it felt important. One Saturday morning, Sarah was at the Foundation's community center when a young woman walked in with a little girl. The woman looked exhausted and frightened, and the little girl clutched a worn stuffed rabbit. "Can I help you?" Sarah asked gently. The woman hesitated. "I'm Maria. This is my daughter, Sophia. We've been living in our car for 3 weeks. Someone told me you might be able to help." Sarah felt her heart clench with recognition. She knelt down to Sophia's level. "I love your rabbit. What's her name?" "Snowball," Sophia said quietly. "That's a beautiful name," Sarah said. Then she looked up at Maria. "Yes, we can help you. Come on, let's sit down and figure out what you need." As Sarah sat with Maria, listening to her story and making notes about how the foundation could help, she thought about the 12-year-old girl who had lived in a car with her parents. She thought about the waitress who had stood up for a homeless veteran in the rain. She thought about all the small choices that had led her to this moment, sitting across from another person who just needed someone to care. Later that evening, Sarah sat in her office writing in the journal she had started keeping. She wrote about Maria and Sophia, about the new programs they were launching, about her hopes for the future. And then she wrote something that had been on her mind lately. "I used to think that changing the world required grand gestures and unlimited resources. Now, I know that sometimes it just requires the courage to do the right thing in a single moment, even when it costs you something. Every person we help is a reminder that kindness is never wasted and that standing up for others is always worth it. I lost a job that night in the rain, but I found my purpose, and I would make the same choice 1,000 times over." The next morning, Sarah received a call from Richard. He wanted to meet for coffee, said he had something important to discuss. When Sarah arrived at the cafe, she found Richard sitting at a corner table with a serious expression. "Is everything okay?" Sarah asked as she sat down. "Everything's fine," Richard assured her. "Actually, better than fine. I wanted to tell you in person that I've made the decision to step down as chairman of the foundation at the end of the year." "So soon?" Sarah asked, though she had known this was coming eventually. "My health has been declining, and I want to spend more time with my grandchildren while I still can." Richard pulled out an envelope and slid it across the table. "The board has already voted unanimously to name you as my successor. This is the official offer." Sarah opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a formal letter offering her the position of executive director and chairman of the Thornton Veterans Foundation, along with a compensation package that made her head spin. "Richard, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Richard suggested with a smile. "Say you'll continue the work we started. Say you'll help even more people than we already have." "Yes," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, of course yes." Richard reached across the table and took her hand. "I knew from the moment I saw you stand up for Robert that you were special. You've exceeded every expectation I had. This foundation, this legacy, it's in the best possible hands." They talked for another hour about the transition plan and the future direction of the foundation. When they finally said goodbye, Richard hugged Sarah tightly. "Thank you for reminding an old man what really matters," he said quietly. "Thank you for seeing something in me that I didn't see in myself," Sarah replied. 5 years after that rainy night at the Golden Fork, Sarah stood in front of a crowd of over 1,000 people at a conference on ending homelessness. She was the keynote speaker, recognized as one of the leading voices in the field. The Thornton Veterans Foundation now operated in 12 cities and had helped over 3,000 people rebuild their lives. But what Sarah was most proud of was the culture they had built. Every employee at the foundation was trained to see the humanity in every person they served, to treat everyone with dignity and respect. They had a saying that was printed on posters throughout their offices: One moment of compassion can change a life. As Sarah delivered her speech, she noticed Robert sitting in the front row. He was now the Foundation's Director of Veteran Services, overseeing a team of peer counselors across all their locations. Next to him sat Maria, the woman who had walked into the community center 5 years ago with her daughter. Maria now worked as the Foundation's Family Services Coordinator, helping other parents navigate the system. Sophia, her daughter, was thriving in school and had become something of a mascot for the Foundation, her story featured in their fundraising materials. In the audience, Sarah also spotted James, Richard's former assistant, who had become a close friend and trusted advisor. And in the back of the room, she could see Richard himself, now 74 and frail, but insisting on attending despite his doctor's advice to rest. After the speech, after the applause and the questions and the networking, Sarah found a quiet moment alone in the empty conference hall. She pulled out her phone and opened her photos, scrolling back to a picture she had saved from that night at Rosie's Diner. Someone had snapped it without her knowing, a grainy image of her and Robert sitting across from each other, coffee cups in hand. She looked so young in the photo, so uncertain. Robert looked broken and defeated. She compared it to a photo from last week, taken at the Foundation's latest fundraising event. She and Robert stood together, both professionally dressed, both smiling confidently. The transformation was remarkable. Her phone buzzed with a text message. She opened it and saw it was from Derek, the host from the Golden Fork, who had tried to throw Robert out that night. "Hi, Sarah. I know this is out of the blue. I saw your speech online and wanted to reach out. I've thought about that night a lot over the years, about how I acted. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Watching what you've done since then has taught me a lot about the kind of person I want to be. Thank you for that lesson, even though you probably weren't trying to teach it. Best regards, Derek." Sarah smiled and typed back a response. "Thank you for reaching out. It takes courage to acknowledge past mistakes. We're all works in progress. If you're ever interested in volunteering, we'd love to have you." That night, Sarah sat in the living room of her comfortable apartment, so different from the cramped studio she had lived in 5 years ago. She had photos on the walls now, pictures of all the people whose lives had intersected with hers. Robert and his daughter laughing together. Maria and Sophia at Sophia's elementary school graduation. The Foundation staff at their annual retreat. Richard receiving a humanitarian award, looking frail but proud. On her coffee table was a framed newspaper article from 3 years ago. The headline read, "From Waitress to Changemaker, How One Act of Kindness Sparked a Movement." Sarah rarely looked at it anymore, uncomfortable with the attention, but she kept it as a reminder of where she had started. Her phone rang. It was Richard. "Did I wake you?" he asked. "No, I was just sitting here thinking. How are you feeling?" "Tired, but happy. I watched your speech online. You were magnificent." "Thank you. I wish you could have been there in person." "I was there in spirit." Richard coughed, and Sarah could hear the weakness in his voice. "Sarah, I need to tell you something. The doctors say I only have a few months left. The cancer has spread." Sarah felt her world tilt. "Richard, no." "It's okay. I've had a good life, and I got to spend my final years doing something meaningful. That's more than most people get." Richard's voice was calm, accepting. "But I wanted to tell you how proud I am of you. You took a simple act of compassion and turned it into something that will outlive both of us. That's extraordinary." "You made it possible," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "No, you made it possible. I just provided resources. You provided the heart. Don't ever forget that." They talked for another hour, reminiscing about the past 5 years, laughing about mistakes they had made, celebrating the victories. When they finally hung up, Sarah sat in the darkness of her living room and cried. Richard passed away 2 months later, surrounded by his family. At his funeral, Sarah delivered the eulogy, talking about his generosity, his vision, and his fundamental belief that every person deserved dignity and respect. She talked about how he had taken a chance on a waitress with no credentials except compassion, and how that chance had changed countless lives. After the funeral, Richard's family approached Sarah. His son handed her a letter. "Dad wrote this a few weeks ago," he said. "He wanted you to have it." Sarah waited until she was alone to read it. The letter was in Richard's shaky handwriting. Dear Sarah, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Don't be sad. I'm at peace. I want you to know that meeting you was one of the great privileges of my life. You reminded me that wealth means nothing if it's not used to help others, that success is measured not in dollars, but in lives touched. You showed me what true courage looks like. The foundation will thrive under your leadership because you understand something that took me a lifetime to learn, that we're all connected, that every person matters, that small acts of kindness can ripple outward in ways we can never fully predict or understand. Keep doing what you're doing. Help more people. Build more programs. Inspire more compassion. And when you face difficult decisions, remember that rainy night when you chose kindness over convenience, principle over pragmatism. That's who you are at your core. Never lose that. With love and gratitude, Richard. 10 years after that night at the Golden Fork, Sarah stood at the groundbreaking ceremony for the Thornton Center, a comprehensive facility that would provide housing, job training, medical care, all under one roof. It was the culmination of years of planning and fundraising, and it represented a new model for addressing homelessness. Robert stood next to her, holding the ceremonial shovel. At 68, he was planning to retire soon, though he had promised to stay on as a consultant. His daughter and grandchildren had flown in for the ceremony. "Should we say a few words?" Robert asked Sarah. "You go ahead," Sarah said. "You've earned it." Robert addressed the crowd of donors, politicians, and community members. 10 years ago, I was sitting on a street corner in the rain, holding a cardboard sign. Invisible to almost everyone who passed by. I had given up hope. I thought that's how my story would end. But then a young woman who had every reason to look the other way chose to see me instead. She defended me when I couldn't defend myself. And that simple act of compassion set in motion everything we're celebrating today. Robert's voice cracked with emotion. This center will help thousands of people, but it exists because one person chose kindness over indifference. That's the real story.
Lesson here. We all have the power to change lives. We just have to choose to use it. The crowd applauded, and Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. She thought about all the ways her life had changed since that night. She thought about the thousands of people the foundation had helped, the families reunited, the lives rebuilt. She thought about Richard and his belief in her. She thought about the 12-year-old girl living in a car who had grown into a woman who could change systems and help others. After the ceremony, as Sarah was walking to her car, a young man approached her hesitantly. He was in his early 20s, dressed in clean but worn clothes. "Excuse me, are you Sarah Mitchell?" he asked. "Yes," Sarah replied. "My name is Marcus. I was at the Golden Fork that night. I was a busboy. I saw what you did for that homeless man, and I never forgot it." The young man smiled. "I just graduated with my social work degree. I was inspired by what you did, and I want to work in the field. I was wondering if the foundation is hiring." Sarah felt a wave of emotion wash over her. This was the ripple effect Richard had talked about. One moment of compassion spreading outward, inspiring others, creating change in ways that couldn't be measured or predicted. "We're always looking for people who care," Sarah said, pulling out her business card. "Send me a resume. Let's talk." As she drove home that evening, Sarah reflected on the journey. It hadn't always been easy. There had been setbacks and failures, people they couldn't help, nights when she had questioned whether they were making any real difference. But there had also been triumphs and transformations, moments of pure joy when someone got their life back on track, when a family moved into stable housing, when a veteran finally found peace. That night, Sarah updated her journal, a practice she had maintained for 10 years now. She wrote about the groundbreaking ceremony, about meeting Marcus, about how strange and wonderful it was that one decision made on a rainy Tuesday night had led to all of this. And then she wrote something she had been thinking about lately. "People always ask me if I regret losing my job that night, if I ever think about what my life would have been like if I had stayed quiet and kept working at the Golden Fork. The answer is simple.
Not for a single second. Because I learned that our choices define us, that standing up for what's right is always worth it, that one person really can make a difference. I didn't set out to start a movement or change the world. I just saw someone who needed help and decided I couldn't look away. Everything else followed from that one choice. And if I've learned anything over the past decade, it's that we all face those moments, those decisions where we can choose compassion or indifference, action or silence. The choice we make in those moments reveals who we really are. I'm grateful every day that I chose compassion. It cost me a job I didn't love, but it gave me a life I do. Years continued to pass, and the Thornton Foundation grew beyond anything Sarah or Richard had originally envisioned. The model they developed was replicated in cities across the country. Sarah wrote a book about her experiences that became required reading in social work programs. She trained thousands of people in compassionate service delivery, and every single day she made sure to remember where it all started. She never forgot Robert, even after he passed away peacefully at age 72, surrounded by his family and the foundation staff who had become his second family. At his funeral, his daughter thanked Sarah personally. "You gave me my father back," she said tearfully. "I had written him off as lost, but you saw something in him worth saving. Thank you for that gift." Sarah never forgot the scared young woman sitting in a diner with a homeless veteran, buying him a meal with money she couldn't really afford to spend, not knowing how her life was about to change. She never forgot Patricia or Derek or any of the people who had tried to throw Robert out that night, because they reminded her how easy it is to dehumanize people we don't know. And she never forgot Richard, the billionaire who had been watching from a private dining room and who had seen something worth investing in. His portrait hung in every foundation office, a reminder that resources plus compassion could change the world. On the 20th anniversary of that rainy night, the foundation held a special celebration. Sarah was now in her mid-40s, her dark hair showing threads of gray. The foundation had helped over 20,000 people and operated in 30 cities. Maria's daughter, Sophia, was now a college graduate, working as a therapist, specializing in trauma and homelessness. Marcus, the former busboy, was now a regional director for the foundation. At the celebration, Sarah told the story one more time. She told it not to celebrate herself,
but to remind everyone that change starts with choice, that every person in that room had the power to make a difference, that the world changed one compassionate act at a time. Afterward, a young girl approached her. She couldn't have been more than 10 years old. "Miss Mitchell, my mom says you're a hero," the girl said. Sarah knelt down to her level, just as she had done with Maria's daughter so many years ago. "I'm not a hero, sweetie. I just did what I thought was right. And you know what? You can do the same thing. Anytime you see someone who needs help, you can choose to help them. That's all it takes." The girl considered this seriously. "Even if other people don't?" "Especially if other people don't," Sarah confirmed. "That's when it matters most." As the celebration wound down and people began to leave, Sarah found herself alone in the foundation's original office, the one where she had worked those first few months. The space was preserved as a kind of museum now, with photos and newspaper articles covering the walls, documenting the foundation's growth. She stood in front of a particular photo that had always been her favorite. It was taken on Robert's first day in his apartment, his face shining with hope and disbelief. Next to it was a photo from 5 years later, Robert in his office at the foundation, confident and healthy. The transformation was stunning. But what struck Sarah most was a small note Robert had written and framed himself, hanging between the two photos. It said simply, "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible." That's all Sarah had done, really. She had seen a human being when others saw only a problem or an inconvenience. She had chosen compassion when indifference would have been easier. She had stood up when staying silent would have been safer. And that choice had echoed through time, touching thousands of lives, creating ripples that spread far beyond anything she could have imagined on that rainy night 20 years ago.
As Sarah turned off the lights and locked the door behind her, she smiled. She had learned the greatest lesson of her life in that moment at the Golden Fork, that we all have the power to change the world, one act of kindness at a time. We just have to be brave enough to use it.